For a young European today, buying a house is turning into an impossible dream. Since 2015, house prices across Europe have increased by 53%. Salaries, on the other hand, accounted for inflation, have only increased by about 5 to 15%. If you're in your 20s or 30s trying to buy a first home, this is why it feels unachievable. In fact, the average European today doesn't buy their first home until they're 31. In some countries, it's closer to 35. The worst part is that as it looks today, nothing is about to change. It's only about to get worse. So how the f are young Europeans supposed to buy a house? Let's find out. The main reason buying a house has gotten so hard is because borrowing money used to be dirt cheap. Now it's not. When you buy a house, you don't cash the entire sum right away. You pay a part of it up front, and the rest you borrow from the bank. For you to borrow that money, the bank charges an interest rate. For most of the 2010s in Europe, the banks hardly charged you any interest rate at all. Because of that, more people could afford to take out loans. And because more people could take out huge loans, house prices went up. Homeowners figured if everyone has free access to more money, they can afford to pay more. So I'll charge more for my house. Now, why was it that cheap, you might ask? To understand that, we need to go back to 2014. Europe was still a mess from the 2008 crisis. It had wrecked everything, and the whole Eurozone nearly fell apart over debt. Growth was flat, and not much was happening overall. So the European Central Bank panicked and did something pretty extreme. They made borrowing basically free. Interest rates were pushed all the way down to zero. The idea here was to desperately get money moving in the economy again, make things happen, build things, start projects, grease the engine, and it worked. People borrowed like crazy. By September 2021, the average mortgage rate across the Eurozone had dropped to 1.3%. That's less than half of what a mortgage costs today. Say you took out a normal €200,000 mortgage back then, over 25 years. You'd pay around €780 a month. And across the whole 25 years, only about €34,000 of that would be interest. At a normal rate, that interest bill would easily be triple that. Things were looking great. People could afford houses, and homeowners were getting paid pretty well. Then, something happened. In February 2022, Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, and the world went crazy. Energy prices immediately went through the roof. Supply chains that were already from COVID got even worse. This caused massive inflation all over Europe. The European Central Bank's entire job is keeping inflation near 2%, so they slammed the brakes. For the first time in over a decade, they started raising interest rates, and it wasn't by a little. Almost every single month for close to 2 years straight, rates went up. By the end of 2023, it had gone from 0 to 4.5%. That was the fastest it had ever been increased, faster than during the 2008 crash. The goal was to get people to spend less, to cool inflation like a lemonade cools your thirst on a hot summer day. Mortgages shot up right along with it. Remember the €200,000 loan we mentioned before? Instead of costing you €780 a month, it would cost you €990 a month. For an average European family, adding an extra €200 a month can make or break the budget. So, normally, this is where prices come back down. The reason is simple. Borrowing gets more expensive, fewer people can afford the same house, so prices fall to meet everyone in the middle. Sounds reasonable. The problem is, it didn't happen. Prices didn't fall. They're still up there. To be fair, they're not increasing, but they're not coming back down. The natural follow-up question would be, why? Well, it turns out there's something else holding this market up, and it's actually got nothing to do with the banks or the interest rates. The real reason prices aren't coming back down is due to the fact that there simply aren't enough houses. Think about it like this. Even if borrowing was still free, if there's only one house for every 10 people trying to buy one, that house is going to be expensive. No interest rate on earth fixes that. According to the European Investment Bank, the EU currently has about 2.25 million homes too few. To build that is like setting up housing for the entire country of Slovenia, not a small task. So how did we even get here? Ironically, it circles back to the exact same crisis we discussed earlier. Back in 2008, when everything collapsed, construction companies got wrecked, building sites shut down, workers got laid off, entire firms went under. And even though the economy eventually recovered, construction never really got back up. There's a few reasons why. The first one is because when everything went to hell, lots of skilled construction workers simply found new jobs. They started working with other stuff, and they never really came back. Basically, Europe today doesn't have enough people to build the amount of houses we need. Then there's the rising cost of, well, everything. If you look at building materials, wages, and transportation, the cost of all of those things have gone up, especially since 2022. That makes new projects less worth building in the first place, so fewer are. And let's not forget about paperwork. To build in Europe is usually a bureaucratic nightmare. Just getting permission to build something new can take years. It's typical Europe, am I right? To be fair here, I think local pushback and environmental concerns should be taken into account. I personally hate it when massive apartment complexes are forced upon small local communities. It destroys the soul of a town, and I'm against it. But it's still objectively true that Europe has a housing problem, and that building new stuff would solve that. The housing issue is real, to the point where it's now one of the European Commission's official top priorities. In 2025, they appointed the EU's very first housing commissioner. But in typical European fashion, building still hasn't picked up, despite everyone agreeing it's a crisis. Welcome to Europe. So no matter what happens to interest rates, no matter how affordable borrowing gets again, there's still just not enough homes available to drive the prices down. When demand is larger than supply, prices stay up. That's Econ 101. To be clear, interest rates aren't nothing. They're a big part of why prices took off in the first place. But they're not why prices are stuck now. Even in a world where rates drop back to zero tomorrow, none of this fixes itself. There just aren't enough houses to go around. But you want to hear something really weird? Despite all of this, quite a few young Europeans are still getting their hands on properties. In some countries, people are buying their first home in their mid-20s, years ahead of everyone else. That's odd. How's that possible? What's their secret? Well, this might be quite depressing for the average person to hear, so buckle up. The secret trick to buying a house these days is winning the lottery, not the actual lottery. I mean, metaphorically winning the lottery, in terms of being lucky enough to have rich parents, or at least parents that aren't dirt poor. To be specific, a strong indicator whether you'll be able to buy a house is whether your parents can help pay for a chunk of it, either through cash gifts, loans, or sometimes an early inheritance. Let's look at the UK. They have some of the clearest data on this. More than half of all first-time buyers there get help from a parent. And the UK also has one of the youngest average first-time buyer ages in all of Europe at 28. Now compare that to France. Family financial help there is far less common. And French first-time buyers are, on average, much older than their British counterparts. That's the sad reality we're in. If your parents can hand you a chunk of money toward a deposit, you skip years of saving that everyone else has to grind through. And look, I don't think there's anything wrong with parents wanting to help their kids. That's what family's for. But it does raise an uncomfortable question about fairness. Because unless you've got a mega high-paying job in your capital, help from parents becomes basically the only way in for a lot of people. That's messed up, but it gets worse. Research from the UK has found something pretty wild. Where that parental help lets you live matters just as much as whether you get any help at all. Because parents with money don't just help their kids buy a house, they help their kids buy a house, somewhere with high-paying jobs, somewhere like London, for instance. And that changes everything, right? Moving to a city like London can boost someone's income by 15% right off the bat. After 8 years in the London game, that gap widens to over 50%. So if your parents can afford to set you up in the expensive city where the good jobs are, you're not just getting a house out of it. You're getting a completely different career compared to someone whose parents couldn't. Let's call it what it is. It's unfair. Unfair as all hell. We like to believe that a good job is what eventually gets you a house. But it's now kind of the opposite. A good house gets you a good job. Messed up, huh? So, to go back to the original question, how the fuck are young Europeans supposed to buy a house? Well, looks like they're not. Not on their own, at least. And that's not good news for Europe. Look, we don't need to sugarcoat it. This is a problem. Buying a house used to be something you worked toward. Save for a few years, get a normal job, put in the time, and eventually it was yours. That's not really true anymore. And that matters on a deeper level than you might think. Owning a home is about more than just money. It's about actually caring about the place you live. When you own the ground under your feet, you start giving a damn about the local school, the local council, or who gets elected down the street. Your roots start to dig themselves a little deeper. And that's what Europe needs. We need people who care about their surroundings, people that feel a connection to the ground they walk on. Owning a house makes it easier to start a family too. Plenty of people want a house before they even think about kids. So when that whole path turns into, hope your parents can help, we've got a real issue on our hands. I don't have anything against parents wanting to help their kids, but if that's basically the only way to do it, we've got a problem. A normal job and a few years of saving should be enough. It shouldn't be this complicated. Now, on the building side, I just want to clarify that I'm not proposing just cramming in apartment complexes onto every small town in Europe. Local communities, the feeling of the town, and the environment should all be taken into account. This isn't a build everything everywhere situation. But Europe does need more homes. That part isn't up for debate. There needs to be some sort of compromise between protect every small town and build, baby, build. If you want to learn more about European economics from a pro-Europe perspective, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching.